League pre-game after our last episode's post-game episode. We finally have a preview for all of you excited listeners. We have the whole crew with us. So all three of the fellow pod compadres are here with me this morning to comment on what we're going to see this weekend. Really interesting international break yet again. Having seen what we saw last time on with like players coming back sick and injured, exact same thing has happened this year. These weeks rather, we have like a really long list of Premier League players, which includes Doherty, Salah, Hendo, Chilwell, Ake, Joe Gomez, and a bunch more. You know, if you look all over Europe, even players like Ramos and Suarez find themselves injured or sick with COVID on the back of this international break. So, what do you guys make of what you guys saw? I mean, I think all of you watched far more football over this international break than I did. Utsav watched games on all the game days for his for his pet project. So, what do you guys make of the games? And we discussed how redundant these fixtures felt last time. Did you feel like there were slightly more competitive games this time? There were some good games in terms of like the quality of the nations facing each other were, but it still didn't seem something that was overly important. And now when you see things like what happened to Salah and how Liverpool are already, really struggling to put out like a good squad on the field, now they're going to struggle even more. What do you guys make of just these past 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the biggest thing, I would say the quality of games is actually pretty decent, but the biggest thing is just like, for what? For like this Nations League, which, for I don't know why it was ever created in the first place. For that to be the main reason, at least with like South America, for example, as well as AFCON, you can say it's for World Cup qualification. You know what I mean? So it actually holds some value. But when it comes to like Nations League and then on top of that, actual friendlies, especially with all of the players and coaches, talking about how, in a time like this, players need even more rest and even more kind of safety, I guess if you want to say, looking over them, like this is a time where it just seems a little bit redundant. And yeah, I mean, obviously, like it sucks for Liverpool fans because for them, especially, the injuries and sickness and whatnot, the list keeps growing. But just even in the grand scheme of things, for everyone, it's just so frustrating when it's just like you see a player got hurt, especially if it's like a long-term injury or like a non-contact injury, like over a friendly that literally held no value.
Yeah, and I think one more thing that was interesting was when you talk about, coming back into the Premier League, something that the Premier League managers weren't particularly all into, but now the five substitutes thing, like that's something that passed this past week. And what do you guys make of that? Like, do you think, considering this international break, that's something that's really, really essential moving forward? Because it's something that I think back then when they re-voted for it at the restart of the Premier League, only I think like three or four teams
Two,
wanted it,
yeah.
but now, yeah, like it's all literally apparently all like these 15, 16 managers want that, which is such an interesting thing because I always felt like it definitely gives the bigger team an advantage, right? Because it just lets them flex their squad muscle and lets them use every single corner of their squad, whereas the smaller teams will really struggle to put out five different substitutes on the field every single time. What do you guys make of that? And do you think that that could actually be a viable solution for this season?
I mean, another way of looking at it is the smaller teams have an advantage in the sense that their players don't go for international duty and stuff. So I feel like for the bigger teams who have a bigger squad, it makes up for that because their players actually go and play like these 2 weeks that, the smaller teams get off. These players have to go like the De Bruyne's and all the big players essentially have to go represent their countries. And like that's a taxing effort on their part. And like you said at the beginning of this episode, like so many of them get injured or get COVID. So I
Yeah,
feel like yeah,
Vinicius, I saw traveled like over 20,000 kilometers this entire
Wow.
international break and didn't play 1 minute of football.
Wow. Those are the people you feel worse for, right? At least the players have something to look
He
forward
didn't
to
even
and like
come on as a
something to.
sub.
Wow, dude. Oh my God. I mean, and it's still such a point of pride, right? That you're even sitting on the bench for
Right.
Brazil. But I mean, it just sucks the way things and turned out. But speaking of players that traveled everywhere and didn't play, Mount was one who actually got an opportunity to play England as usual, irrespective of their, pathetic performances, still seem to like dominate the headlines. Had a much better performance against Iceland than they did against Belgium. But one team that looked like they were having one of the better international breaks for Chelsea. The first Germany game, I think, um Werner scored a couple, and Havertz had a good game. And then even in the first France game of the season, I mean of the weekend, Kante was man of the match, scored the winning goal. So it was a really really interesting break for them. But they travel to St James's this week and face a team that's sort of been in and out of form, but still finds themselves like just 4 points behind Chelsea in Newcastle. Really, really interesting season they've had so far. Utsav made a good point about how Saint Maximin, who is without a doubt their best player last season, is having a real tough time finding his feet this season. But at the same time, they're still getting performances and they're still getting results on the back of like a few Callum Wilson goals. So Callum Wilson might not play this weekend. What do you guys make of Chelsea's visit to Newcastle? And I got some feedback from one of our pod listeners saying we are an anti-Chelsea podcast or a podcast that doesn't give Chelsea enough love. So what do you guys
I
think of?
always, I've always been a stout and think that I believe Chelsea will finish top four. If they want me to say that they're going to win the title, then I can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what do they want? Like,
What more do you
what do
want
these
than
fans
top
want?
four? Yeah.
Well, what do you guys
I
make
think
of
the
this game? And
introduction of Ziyech in the past couple of weeks has like really stepped up Chelsea's performances. I mean, we already spoke about how the defense has become a lot better as well. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I keep saying this, but it's all about consistency. And Newcastle, I feel like, won't be much of a threat to them in the sense that I feel like they'll continue their good run of games. And yeah, I think it's going to be an easy game for Chelsea this week.
what do you guys make of where Newcastle is this season? I think last season when Bruce came in, everyone was like so negative, right? And like he really proved himself. Everyone, obviously, once Benitez got fired or left or whatever the decision was at that point, when he came into the season, everybody gave him so much, gave him a really tough time, including the Newcastle fans, expecting like a really bland, dull brand of football, and he did kind of offer that, but at the same time, he brought in like a solidity and a rigidity, which was a continuation of Rafa's time, but still he brought like a little bit more of an expansive style of football for a team like this, even though he has an entirely pragmatic group of players. What do you guys make of where Newcastle has come so far, and especially now that he's playing that front two of ASM and Callum Wilson, which is a very, very different type of approach than a typical Newcastle team would have had all these years. What do you make of that, Apur?
This summer they've had like good signings also. They got Wilson and they got Ryan Fraser, and all positive signs, where they want to attack, they want those goals, they don't want to scrape those 1-0 victories or those draws that Newcastle have been known for in the last 3-4 years. So I honestly think Steve Bruce has done an incredible job, and it's going under the radar, which is good for them, because most of the brunt is bared by their owner. I forget his name right now, and they were they were more upset with him for signing Steve Bruce than what actually Steve Bruce has done with
Absolutely.
Newcastle. So I think if they like secure Premier League status by March or something, that would be a very successful season. As long as they don't get into that relegation battle, I think he's doing well with what he has.
Yeah, and I think the way they've started the season also like really lends them to having like a good platform because despite the fact that they're 13th on the table, they're only like 4 points off of Chelsea, who are fifth. So it just shows you how clustered that part of the table is this year, and just a few good results, like we mentioned last week as well. Just a few good results either way. Like Newcastle have had a phenomenal record against Chelsea. In the last 6 games that they've played at home versus Chelsea, they've won five and drawn one,
Oh, wow.
which is ridiculous. I just couldn't believe that when I read it. I think it's the last seven they've won five, drawn one, and lost one. So it just goes to show you, Chelsea do have a few of these boogie teams. They really struggle sometimes away from home against these teams. So it's going to be a really, really interesting game. I mean, like we mentioned, Chelsea also have their fair share of injuries. despite the fact that Ziyech is back, it looks like Pulisic is going to be out yet again for a couple of weeks. Havertz is not entirely fit, so it's going to be a lot
Chilwell.
of responsibility on Abraham, and no Chilwell as well, who's been one of their biggest outings
Yeah, he's
for
been
attack,
really good.
which has been he's been phenomenal every time he stepped on the field for them in the Premier League this season. So
I can vouch for
uh,
that because of Fantrax.
yeah, I mean he's got the point return on Fantrax as well. But speaking of defenders that get high results on Fantrax, we had João Cancelo. I think they're just favorite guy to bench on having a really good game again for Portugal, and they host City after Pep's contract renewal. City host Spurs coming who come into this game as like far more likely to win the title, at least according to our last episode. So Spurs are sitting second on the table, looking far more convincing than City have for this season. I think that's something that you'd all agree on. When you especially look at the form of Kane and Son, I think without a doubt we were having this argument yesterday, and I think Kane and Son are the only two players I would put in like Mane's category as like best players in the Premier League right now. Even though De Bruyne and Salah would, without a doubt, would be in that argument any year, but this year I feel like these are the three standout players so far. And Son has not scored in the last couple of games, but Kane has really been incredibly important, getting their last two games wrapped up with his goals and winning those two games because of them. So, what do you make of this game, especially? And do you think this is a bigger game for City, or do you think it's a bigger game for Spurs? For all of you, who do you think is far more eager to win this game?
Before I answer this question, Ashwin, how does it like? What's going on in your mind now that Messi's confirmed to City? Pep is signed till 2023.
Oh,
So,
man.
which side of Manchester are you on?
Dude, it's gonna be. I actually believe you. Like, I think it's done. Like, I think Messi to City is like just a matter of time before it's confirmed. I don't know what to make
Imagine
of it. I
how
think
much Usain would hate City if this were to go through. Just think about how much he already hates
I
them, and think about.
swear.
I
But
just
did you
thought
did
about
you
it.
hear about
Swear.
Messi's comments? He's just like, I'm so tired of
Yeah, he's like, I'm
um
always a scapegoat.
No, because
yeah.
Griezmann's agent came and said that he's feeling uncomfortable because of Messi's terrorism in the
Griezmann sucks.
yeah. He's
It's
like, just find
Messi's
your.
fault.
He's literally so bad.
But coming back to the game, I think it's definitely I would say it's much more important for City in terms of the table, but equally important for Spurs because they know where they stand if they beat City. Especially, I think it's at the Etihad. So
No, it's
I
like
think
It's
No,
about
it's not.
That's Spurs
oh,
Stadium, rather.
so then it's more important for Spurs even. So it'll be good how Mourinho comes up and how he lines up against City. And I don't think City has that many injuries. Fortunately, they've got Gabriel Jesus back. Ferran Torres killed it again this international break. So they have like a good first 11 for them. And Ruben Diaz also scored 2 goals in their comeback victory.
Yeah, I was gonna say I definitely agree. Like I think it's big for Spurs in the sense that, if we are to start taking them seriously as title contenders, these are the kind of games, especially at home on top of that I mean, a draw, I'm not saying it's like an awful result, but these are the kind of games that you have to win at home if you truly want to be, a title contender against your other title contenders. But on the flip side, I do think that for City, at the same time, like, look where they are in the table. Things haven't really gone their way. They haven't looked 100%. If they want to get themselves back in the title race, which they obviously will, like, they need to start stringing things along. And this is the perfect time with everyone coming. Aguero's going to come back to fitness. I know Ake got injured. I don't know this. I haven't checked the seriousness of that injury, but yeah, obviously Diaz looked really, really good. So I think it'll be a big game. But
I have
yeah,
a
I
question
don't
for
know.
you guys. The last time Mourinho won a title with Chelsea, I don't know if you guys remember, but he always, in the big games, it was very like drab. He used to nullify his opponents, but it was against the smaller teams that he kept like winning. So I wonder if he's gonna try and use that same tactic, and do you think it'll work this time as well? Considering everyone's so like competitive, do you think it's just good enough to like nullify your top six rivals and just beat the smaller teams? Do you think you can win the title that way, or do you think you
I
need to
mean,
like also beat your rivals?
In
I don't know
theory, I
how.
think so, but I don't think you like. How would you do that against City? You know?
I don't know how exactly. I don't know how efficiently
Yeah,
he'll be able to do that. Not because of City, but with the back four he
defenders.
has.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
they're nowhere close to what he had at Chelsea because that was his main strength. Here, his main strength are his front three, front four, whatever. So I know that approach works, but I don't know if he has the squad to do that.
No, because I definitely feel like he's gonna set up to nullify City this game.
No,
I feel like
honestly, coming back to that season, I think if you remember that season, I think he'd won every game. They lost one game to Newcastle now that I'm looking at it, but that
Of
5-3 to
course.
Tottenham, yeah, they literally lost. Chelsea only lost to Newcastle that season, and then they lost that 5-3, that ridiculous game to Tottenham. And then after that, he just decided, like, lock it up. I'm just gonna, like, win the
yeah,
title with this team. And I remember they beat United 1-0, which is one of, like, the worst, like, performances I've seen by a league-winning team against United, where they literally had, like, 34% possession or something, and United just had all the ball, like Louis van Gaal's famous United, and we just weren't able to score, which just goes to show you the type of pragmatism and stuff he's willing to set up a supposed title contender with, right? Like he doesn't care as much as like Klopp or Guardiola
mhm,
do about like actually trying to express a certain type of football, which would make it very interesting this season. I think that's a good point that you made in terms of this is a season where that type of tactic could be really effective, where he could just from those supposed other top five teams, he could just take like a point here and there, maybe win a home game here and there, and as long as he doesn't lose all like a significant number of those games, that puts them in like a really good position, to challenge for whatever they want to challenge for, whether it's a title or for Europe. So I think this is going to be a huge game. And coming back to, I personally think it's a far more integral game for Spurs than it is for City because we all kind of know what to expect from City. But if Spurs win this game, I think they really set themselves for a really interesting next few weeks. Anitej, you were going to say something?
yeah. I don't know about him winning this game or not, but he's definitely winning Instagram game. Like, have you seen his latest post?
Yeah, I saw
It's
that.
so
He's a
I think
legend.
he summed up like this entire international break the best. You should have just read out his post as the introduction to this episode, I think. It was so funny.
No,
about
but
like
coming
his
back to
reaction to his
that,
players getting injured and stuff.
Yeah,
uh,
he's like, I have
coming
six
back to that,
players to
Ashwin,
check.
but wouldn't you say that, as a poor said, and I definitely think like those seasons where he had, it was like Aspi and God mode. That was when David Luiz was really, really good. Like you had defenders you can truly rely on. Like, would you hand the keys to Eric Dyer? And you know what I mean?
Toby,
Toby,
Toby
like,
supposedly had a phenomenal like international break, even though I watched like only a little
yeah,
bit
he
of
won
the
me some money. He won
Belgium
me
game.
some money. Yeah,
So you owe him. No, but I agree with
I
you. I
owe
think in
some
terms of
money.
that's a very different type of team, than he has now, where their strength. I think that back then he had like Fabregas, Hazard, Costa as like this
Yeah,
predominantly like creative goals. Everything was those three in the front, and obviously he had Willian as well. But Willian was just
brilliant.
running around.
Yeah.
But
I wonder if
I
Willian played for Brazil.
no, he was in Dubai. Did you guys see that?
What was he
He's
doing
also
there?
in trouble because he wasn't called up by any national team. He just went to Dubai to go eat at Salt Bay's restaurant. So there's like a picture of him getting spread about that, and they like this idiot doesn't even play well for Arsenal. He's just taking all their money, and now when he comes back, he has to get like tested and he has to quarantine. Like it's such a mess that he
This
got
might be a
himself.
blessing in disguise.
It might be actually a
Yeah,
good thing, but even with COVID, Arteta will still play him.
even if it comes positive, he'll still start him.
He'll still start him, bro, so that doesn't matter. But coming back to Spurs, I think that defense is definitely weaker than, like you said, like what Chelsea was back in the day. Even Courtois versus Lloris is like a
Oh
big,
yeah,
big difference, right? But at the end of the day, I think it's the way you set up can also make a big difference. Like if he's not played a cam, like Lo Celso has not started. If I'm not wrong, he started the game against Newcastle. That's the only game, but he's essentially plays like 7-3. Like it's a typical Mourinho. Like he just lets his
yeah.
front do whatever he wants, and that's like a little bit different and than what he would do at Chelsea because he'd still
But I,
expect like Costa and Willian to like track back, and I think that's something that he doesn't really need from this team. So having Hoiberg and Sissoko, I was talking to Karun actually, who's a Spurs fan himself, and he's telling everyone to like calm down on Hoiberg. He's like, he's not Javi, like we can't expect him to like suddenly become Scholes Gerrard in one. Like you need to give him some time, and he's definitely playing well, but you can't like sort of over rely on him. You still need to give him that support of playing a Sissoko or a Lo Celso along with him. You can't really like play a number 10, which would actually be interesting because they could probably fit Ali in there. But yeah, before we move on, Anita, do you want to
Ali is
close that?
done.
Yeah. Before we move on, I guess like the only way we can judge them is based on how they set up against United, who's like their fellow rival, right? And the way they started off that game, even before like United before Martial got sent off, they did start strong and they were like playing good football. They weren't like sitting back and stuff. So I mean, City's an entirely different team, but yeah, I don't know. That was an interesting way Mourinho
Easy
started.
win for City, basically.
That
No,
money
but
I bet on Spurs was the easiest money I've made. They were like plus 400 against United. I was like, something's wrong. And then I bet. Okay, fine.
oh yeah, imagine if you put like the like whatever the
The
Spurs
house.
handicap on that, you would have been
Oh,
like
I
plus
would put the
700, plus 800. But anyway, so I mean, we're talking about how important this game is for Spurs and City, but another game that is equally important for both teams is Liverpool Leicester, which is probably the next biggest game, if not the biggest game of the weekend. Leicester went into last time when they played Liverpool in the league, they found themselves in a very, very strong position. But Liverpool put on probably their best performance of the season with Arnold getting 3 assists and a goal that game, and like virtually ending Leicester's title hopes in that moment. And this season is another similar story where Leicester come into the game above Liverpool on the table, have had a really, really good start to the season. All despite them having their fair share of injuries, but I would think that two, like Vardy, Pereira, and Madison are probably their three best players in my eyes, and they didn't have two of them for pretty much the entire start of the season. So it's going to be really, really fascinating to see how they cope now that their whole team is back. Liverpool, we mentioned a little bit about this in the beginning. The big injuries, obviously, Salah is like going to be a big miss, but he doesn't seem to be particularly symptomatic or anything. I think he's just going to be in isolation, so he'll be back in like no time. But I think the bigger concern is regarding Gomez, who got injured in training, if I'm not wrong, like in England training. So that was like just such an unfortunate circumstance. Now he's out for 6 months, which essentially leaves Liverpool no recognized centre back fit right now, which I guess Matip will be back soon
Matip.
enough. So
No, Matip will play.
Matip will play then. So that makes him like Matip and Fabinho will probably be or will Neko
If-
play?
No,
Uh,
Fabinho's a
Phillips.
doubt. It'll be probably Nat
Fabinho's
Phillips
a
with
doubt.
Nat
because
Phillips,
even
Matip, James Milner on the right, and
Oh,
I don't know who
God.
on the left.
Nobody on the left.
because Robbo was also almost like he pulled up in the
Hamstring.
Wait,
Not
isn't
the
Tsimikas
Scotland game.
fit again though?
No, he's not
Yeah.
back in training yet.
Oh, so then he's also gone. And then Reece Williams, the backup 19-year-old center back,
Injured himself.
also got injured.
Under
Yeah.
21 England. So
And then Hendo's not
Also-
going to play. So
at least we
we'll
have
see.
Bobby, so it's fine.
Wait, do
He
you
can
Yeah,
think
play
because
CDM. He can play CDM.
this club also
Yeah.
started training a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
before every other club? I don't know if that's the reason why. I don't
Well,
know.
now I don't think he does that as much anymore, but he's definitely known for that. But I mean, at least like we had a couple players come through, like Jota, Wijnaldum. They came back like no injuries. I saw a tweet about Wijnaldum that I sent to Apoorv. Like Wijnaldum obviously scored He scored like 3 goals this international break. In the last like 10 games, he scored as many international goals as Harry Kane has. And the tweet was just like, can't wait for Wijnaldum to come back to Liverpool and protect the fullbacks and recycle possession. But
Oh, he's been exceptional as a 10 for Netherlands.
Yeah.
Like scores so
No,
many.
even for
The guy-
Newcastle, man, like
if you
he
just
knows
watch
how to
him play,
score.
he's just so intelligent. That's the thing. Like he just is so
absolutely.
smart.
Irrespective of his like talent, he's really like just gets himself around, and he's like a really, really clever player. So when you put him alongside the likes of Van der Beek and Depay, like it really gets the best out of him in a way that
Yeah.
Salah and Bobby, all these losers,
You know.
can't get the best out of Genie like that. But anyway, coming back to like this is another like similar question to you. What do you guys make of Leicester season so far? And we discussed them in decent detail last week, but we weren't able to. I mean, like this is probably their biggest game of the season as well, considering what result they have. What do you guys make?
Going into the game, Vardy has been rested for 2 weeks. Madison has not played for England. Most of the squad has not gone out, and they've been training and
Tielemans played
everything.
really well.
UT didn't play well, yeah. But so I think it's Leicester's game to lose, even though it's, I think, at Anfield. But yeah, so I don't know. I just feel like Liverpool, like Klopp is going to turn around. Like he's just going to attack, and try to win the game that way, like 17-18 season. But I don't know. I genuinely consider Liverpool to be the underdogs or whatever in this game.
with the injuries and everything.
Underdog.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm usually like I try to be the little bit conservative just because, you know, that way set your expectations low and things happen. But I don't know. I mean, I still think at the end of the day, like the defense is just the biggest thing. Like Salah obviously is a miss, Hendo's a miss, but we can get by with those players. I think if Fabinho does manage to play and Thiago somehow manages to play, I'll actually be feeling like pretty decent. Just because we'll fill in like some of those key positions right there. This is the time for Firmino to really step it up, honestly. Like, if there was a time for him to step it up, like, come on, dude. Like, this is the fucking time. And not even in a goal capacity like we were talking about last week, but the guy just sucks. Whatever he does, he just sucks.
He
So-
scored for Brazil
For
this
Brazil.
international break, yeah.
Yeah, the goal sucked. So, I think the fact that we're playing at home, I'm hoping, you know, that really long undefeated streak doesn't get broken. And I think with some solid players, I'm just hoping at the end of the day that we don't lose at home. A draw, like, I would love a win. A draw, like, I'll take. Coming on to Leicester, I think Leicester is really, really good this season. Every time I've bet on them, they've won. And like bet on them a couple of times. They look really good. I think the biggest thing for Rodgers would be finding that balance with all of the old players, with the new players coming in, finding the right balance would be the biggest thing. So fingers crossed.
No, I think it's actually such a good point you made about Rodgers, and even in this thing you mentioned about we spoke last week as well about Leicester's squad depth, but just the way he sort of maneuvered through it will be really interesting to see how Klopp does. But Rodgers has
Exactly.
had his fair share of injuries, right? Like we were looking at, like in the beginning of the season, Castagne was one of their best players. He hasn't played in the last few games. So Yonchu, who's without a doubt their best centre back, hasn't played at all. Like
He's
Fuchs,
injured,
somebody who
yeah.
looked like he was completely out of the squad. Like he's brought him back in and really made Fuchs like a real asset to their defense. And now they're playing the five back, you know. So it just goes to show you, like I think we all sort of last time we mentioned about how like Rodgers wasn't able to take a team over the hump that like the Liverpool title season or Leicester last season. But I think this year he's sort of become a little smarter in the way that he's approached games. Like he's not the Leeds game was a real eye opener in terms of seeing how tactically advanced Rodgers actually is, because you would think that Leeds would really be a tough team for like this injury ridden Leicester to battle, but the way he set the team up made it really easy for Vardy and all to be effective. So I think he's going to do a similar job on Klopp this week. So it's going to be interesting, you know. So if Klopp does go all out attack, I think it'll be a really fascinating
But
game. But I still,
it is at Anfield, so I feel like it's like Liverpool's to lose because they're just so good at home. I feel like the pitch also helps the way they play.
But the
And
thing
yeah,
is,
so
just the back four is what worries me. Otherwise, if we had lost Salah, Firmino, and Mane, for example, and we had all of the back four, as weird as it sounds, I'd be more confident than vice versa.
maybe.
no, it's
So
because the
Anitish,
quality
in the
of
last 3 games at Anfield, Liverpool have conceded first in the first half. We have conceded the
yeah,
most goals in the first half this season. So the last 3 games we've conceded at Anfield first and then gone on to win, just like, we just got ourselves across the line. So I think we've got very lucky with our performances at Anfield, and there's no like that whole crowd support or whatever.
Yeah, I
But
was gonna say with or without the crowd, like Anfield, you guys are just something else. But also your head to head with Leicester is like really strong. I feel like the last time you guys lost was in 2017 or something. And that like even when you go away to them, you end up winning most of the times. So I
Last
don't
year,
know,
2-1
history
call.
does matter in these sort of fixtures, I feel, because you like Leicester coming into this will have that sort of mentality where like we've never won against them or we haven't won against them in like a long time. So I feel like that will play into how
yeah,
Rogers sets up as well.
And if I'm Rodgers, I'm telling them like we need to be the team to break that Anfield, like to get the players up and running for that game.
And nobody would
Yes.
love to take that street more
Yeah,
than
exactly.
Rodgers, right? Like I feel like
As
he'd
long
be.
as we don't concede if we concede in the first 15 minutes as usual, then I'll be like,
Another
just get a
Aston
draw.
Villa.
Just get a
Another
draw.
Aston
Just get a
Villa.
draw.
Just seven.
Just get a draw. If Vardy
Wait, so is
starts,
Madison back?
Yeah,
Because
Madison.
Madison
Only Rodgers knows, dude. Honestly,
Madison,
with
I
Madison,
think, has been back like here and there, but he just hasn't started. And
Yeah,
I think that's kind of showing the tactical maturity of Rodgers, as Ashwin was saying, especially because they've been playing that like hybrid 3-4-2-1 this season. That if you're, you know, playing him, you have to play him in a certain position, and you don't want to just always throw out your best players if it's gonna, affect the team in a negative way.
Yeah, and exactly, and like that's why like having like a Tielemans and stuff, it just gives him so many options, right? Like having those two, Tielemans and Ndidi and Mendy. I mean, like Ndidi's not played much this season yet, but I think Leicester find themselves in a very, very good position. But moving forward, we have one last segment. We just want to talk about quick fantasy and betting tips of the week. A big, big topic of discussion was, in fact, when I found out about Salah, I was telling Anita yesterday, like. I found out about Salah attending his brother's wedding through an FPL Twitter, where the guy was like, guys, it's so bad in Egypt right now, the COVID situation, that if anybody steps outside of their house, they're getting COVID. And this guy had like a full-fledged wedding. He went to his brother's wedding. And it was to the point where I was telling Anita, is just that Mido, that Egyptian legend, like he was so upset with the Egyptian FA saying, how scared are you of Salah? Like just tell him to behave in a certain way. And like he feels like El Neni and all have fallen sick because of Salah, right? So it's like a really, really interesting situation. So that FPL guy was like, guys, I'm an Egyptian. I don't want to guarantee that Salah has COVID, but he almost definitely has. So consider different options in your team. So I was thinking, would you hold on to Mo in the FPL format, or would you,
get a
drop
much
him and
cheaper, get a much cheaper Jota in. Same
get
goal
it
ratio,
half
same
half the
everything.
price, literally
Yeah.
half the price? Yeah,
I
but
know that
but
they said that I don't. So they got positive tests today. So I don't know how that's going to affect things. They said yesterday, like if they got negative tests, he would miss this game and miss Atalanta and be back next weekend. So you're only missing one game. But the fact that they got tests today, because I think you have to turn 2 negative tests in. If he misses 2 games, that's a lot of money you're leaving on the bench. I mean, you can get like De
exactly.
Bruyne or someone.
So that was my big thing, was to move him out for De Bruyne, which was like interesting considering Spurs' fixtures, City's fixtures rather. So that's a good tip. I actually think like I said, so basically apparently, so once you test negative, you need to be in isolation for like another 5 to 10 days, which is going to be so interesting to see how they actually like sort of like how that works in practice. Because of a player of Salah's like stature, I don't know if they'll actually go through. I guess they have to, right? There's no ifs or buts about
Yeah, there's
these
no.
particular
It's not
protocols.
in
So
depth.
exactly, and it's not like Spain or like one of those countries where I guess like football sort of trumps government. So it's going to be a really interesting time. But another interesting thing would be the bet of the weekend. Do you have? I think a really interesting game that would be like a great bet would be Leeds Arsenal. I just find
I
that
was I
to
was
be
looking at that. So I
that
think
it's so
don't bet
heavily
on
favored.
Arsenal. So every time you bet on them, they end up losing.
no, no. I bet on Arsenal against United. Just FYI. So you should thank me for that. But
Oh yeah, you guys.
I mean, yeah. I think Arsenal is like plus 120, Leeds is plus 220. I probably will stay away from that game because it just seems like heartbreak one way or the other. But I think a game where it could be if if Spurs are like plus one or something, wouldn't be a bad bet to bet on Spurs plus one, which means plus one means if they lose by a goal, you still only push, and a draw or a win, you would win money. So something to consider.
And like you think Spurs will get good odds for a +1 because of how like City.
Well, plus one, you'll plus whenever you're betting the spread, the odds are always going to be somewhat close to even.
Yeah.
If you're betting money line on them outright winning, yeah, I'm sure you'll get like Spurs like plus 300, plus 350.
So it's definitely an interesting bet to look at. And with that, we conclude this week's episode unless somebody has anything to add on. And with Anita's train, who had the train in the background? There's a loud train in someone's background. But
Anitesh lives
with
by the
that,
train station.
Yeah,
Anita
blame me when it is a fool. It's fine.
come to an end. But see you guys next week.